The International Parliamentarian Union was born approximately at the same time as the International Peace Bureau, established by the same, more or less, the same people. People that wanted international cooperation to obtain peace. So we are very happy to have with us today the president of IPU, Saber Chowdhury. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ingeborg. The challenge that a speaker speaking after Mr. Muller is that he's so accomplished that by the time you come up to speak, you realize that he has already addressed most of the issues that you're going to talk about. So I have that challenge to confront in addition to all the other challenges. Let me start by bringing to you greetings from the Inter-Parliamentary Union and also by thanking our host. Dr. Thompson, thank you for opening the doors of the Technical University for us to have this conference. Thank you, Ingeborg, for the great organization, and also Reina. I know to put together an event of this scale, it needs a lot of commitment, a lot of hard work, many individuals that we don't probably see here today, but they have worked tirelessly behind the scenes. And I would like to acknowledge their contribution as well as that of all the sponsors and supporters. As you have heard, from Ingeborg, the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the International Peace Bureau are in fact sister organizations, born at about the same time at the end of the 19th century out of the peace movement that was taking place. And if you look at the founders, and in fact the very first laureates of the Nobel Peace Prize, whether it is Frédéric Passy from France, Henri Lafontaine from Belgium, or Albert Gobard from Switzerland, they in fact championed the course of both of these two organizations. Since then, of course, the IPU has gone more into democracy, and the International Peace Bureau has focused on peace. Of course, we both acknowledge that peace and democracy reinforce each other. And at the end of the day, the higher the level of democracy and the higher the qualitative aspect of peace, the more it nourishes and enriches the life of citizens. Michael Muller laid out to you the Sustainable Development Goals. What a huge and momentous year it was last year for the UN processes, for multilateralism, and for those of us who have a global vision of the challenges that confront us. And if I may just try and pick up on the themes that he articulated, quite often when we talk of the Sustainable Development Goals, we talk of the 5 Ps. The first P represents people, the centrality of people in all our thoughts, all our actions. The second P is peace, an absolute fundamental prerequisite without which the interest of the people cannot be served. The third P is living within planetary boundaries. If we look at the current patterns of consumption and production, it's going to take 2.5 times the resources of what planet Earth can provide for us to continue to survive. The fourth P is prosperity. If we can be within the planetary boundaries, if we can ensure peace, then people will prosper. And the fifth P is partnership. Partnership across the board of parliamentarians, civil society, NGOs. Partnership also in terms of the International Peace Bureau, reaching out to a whole new set of partners such as the Inter-Parliamentary Union. So you see, the 5 Ps that we talk about in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals are as relevant to the workings of this Congress that we are talking about. It is also important for us to know that the achievements of last year, at least in terms of formulating the agreements, is in fact quite remarkable. We cannot enforce a ceasefire in Aleppo, but the world leaders were able to come together and find common ground despite all of the differences and challenges. And what is even more impressive, and I think this is a reason for hope for all of us, is that the world started to look not just as the symptoms, but also the diseases. So if you look at the new framework for disaster risk reduction, it is not looking at cyclones and hazards after they have taken place. It is trying to mitigate the risk. It is trying to increase the preparedness. It is trying to enhance the resilience of societies. So you're addressing the disease and not the symptom. If you look at climate change, we have moved from adaptation. I come from Bangladesh, and I know how challenging adaptation is. And now we are looking at mitigation, reducing emissions, so looking at the root of the problem. And similarly, it is with the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we consume the resources that are available to us without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their needs? Again, we are looking at the root causes. And prevention is really what we are talking about today. That is also the message that you are trying to spread. So what I'm saying is there is a new thinking in the global community, a new way of looking at problems, a new way to imagine peace, a new way to think peace, and a new way to how we can find the responses and solutions that are most needed. Now, on top of all of these that happened last year, 2016 April saw two very important events. One was at the Security Council, and the other was at the General Assembly of the UN. Now, it's very unusual for both organs of the UN, the Security Council as well as the General Assembly, to come up with identical resolutions. And what did those resolutions do? They re-looked at peace, not just, as Michael mentioned, an absence of hostilities, but looking how you can prevent the outbreak of violence in the first place. Mediation, conflict resolution. What I'm trying to get across is that we now have a consensus amongst the international community on a much more expansive and broader definition of peace than has ever been possible in the past. And our challenge is, how do we leverage this new reality when it comes to peace? The Sustainable Development Goals tell us where we want to be. We also are saying where we want to be. A world without nuclear weapons. A world without war. But the question and the challenge always is the how. Sustainable Development Goals tell us we have to be from A to B. In the peace movement, we know where we have to be. But how we get there is always the challenge. And I think that's where partnerships come in. If you look at all of the major changes that have taken place in the global discourse, it is only when people get involved. It is when the change, the drive for change, the passion for change is within the people whose lives we are trying to change. So how do we ignite this passion amongst the people? The first thing I think we need to do is we have to get young people on board. You have done marvelously well, a fabulous job flying the flag. But how many new people are we able to get into the movement? That is going to be a very important challenge. Because we may talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. What is going to happen over the next 15 years? It'll be great if we are all alive, but it is really an agenda for the young people, of the young people. So how we reach out to them is going to be very, very important. How strategic we are is also going to be important. So when peace is packaged in very broad terms, when we look at a whole host of new challenges, whether it is climate change, whether it is disaster risk reduction, whether it is sustainable development, then the question of resource allocation becomes absolutely critical. And the MDGs, that the Sustainable Development Goals, have succeeded. There is the unfinished business of the MDGs, which means we were not even able to achieve all of the goals. And here we are, setting ourselves very high, very aspirational goals, leaving no one behind. It means addressing the needs of the last first, those who are the most difficult to reach, getting to them. It's going to need a huge effort. Yes, of course, business as usual is not going to work. So we have to look at more political will, more commitment, and more financial resources. If we don't have that resources, then these vision of a brave new world, a transformation in the society that we seek, is never going to come about. And I think that is the start for us to reinvent this movement. So it is an allocation of resources. As parliamentarians, I don't think we have done a good job. There are many parliaments in the world who all too easily agree to whatever is tabled by the executive. We have to learn to say no. And there are examples. If I look at Uganda, there was this very interesting case where resources for health, education was not up to what parliamentarians wanted. The allocation for military was huge. The parliamentarians took a stand and they said, we are not going to approve this budget till such time you reduce military expenditure and give us more resources. So that is the kind of action that we need. And the peace movement has to connect with decision makers, whether they are responsible for allocation of budgets or whether it is governments. And that is why that fifth P that I talked about, partnerships, is so absolutely vital and critical. We need to get those partnerships going. And I think if we can, then we can certainly look at a brave new world. We have to look at whether nuclear weapons make us more or less safe. We have close to 1,600 weapons, nuclear weapons, enough to blow the whole solar system a few times. Do we need those weapons? So what do we do about it? We get the people involved. And there is nothing like people power. $1.7 trillion. Scandalous, outrageous, almost criminal. When we cannot provide the basic provisions of life, whether it is toilet, whether it is sanitation, whether it is education, or whether it is fighting the impacts of climate change. So that's how we need to frame our argument. That's how we need to connect the dots. And that is how we take this movement forward. Now let me leave you with a parting thought, because I know you will hear a lot of things. What is it that I would like you to remember from this plenary session? What differentiates us as human beings from other living creatures? It's our ability to choose wisely, to choose judiciously. That is our human calling. That is why we are human beings. And I think if we can choose wisely, when it comes to welfare and warfare, as Ingeborg, you put it, when it comes to meeting people's basic needs, rather than create the weapons that destroy us and threaten our entire civilization, that way we will be acting as human beings and we will be making the right choices. So let us go back with those words. Let us act as what we are, as humans, with the ability to choose wisely, with the ability to choose judiciously. And if we can, then we will have kept our pledge, our promise to the generation of tomorrow. The child who is going to be born tomorrow, whether in Bangladesh, Africa, or Latin America, that is the future, that is the legacy that will leave behind for them. And let us all work, and I believe that if we do that with the new international thinking, the way the global community looks at peace and how we can move from A to B, I think we will indeed be able to leave a better world, a world without nuclear weapons, a world without war, and a world based on peace, and a world which is based on the right of every human being to have his needs met by the resources that Mother Earth has provided to us. Peace, remember, is not merely an absence of war. It is not also only a cessation of hostilities. It is an environment that allows us to thrive as human beings, to live up to our potential and live a life of dignity and respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Saber Chowdhury. I think you have shown to everybody that the joint thinking that was underlying the establishment of our two organizations is still there today. We will take you up on the closer cooperation between the peace movement and decision makers. Thank you so much.